welcome to another edition of What's Happening Education and COVID-19. And I am pleased to be joined today by my good friend and longtime colleague, Chris Kennedy. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about where you are, what you do, and then we'll keep chatting.
Morning, Dean. I'm Chris Kennedy, Superintendent of Schools in West Vancouver, British Columbia. We have about 7,500 students, and we are 1 week into remote learning.
Right. Now, you guys sort of came off and again, this was the timing that everybody was either a little bit blessed to have or not so blessed to have, with spring break sort of coming a little bit before that. So I'm curious, I guess this is always my first question to people is, what have you report to the Ministry of Education in British Columbia. So what is basically the task at hand? What are you telling teachers are their duties? Like, what are you responsible for, and what have you told them about the next couple months?
Yeah, so the ministry's in our case has really set out 4 priorities. This first is around that the safety and the well-being of students and staff. The second one is supporting our essential service workers. Our third priority is around the vulnerable learners, and then the fourth priority is around continuity of learning for all students. And I think it's kind of interesting how they set those out, and they've been really specific that they are in that order, because I think most of the conversation is about, oh, what are we going to do about learning? What platforms are we going to do? You go online. Our ministry's been really clear, like that's a priority, but it's actually the fourth priority for them. And I think by continuing to emphasize that, that's allowed the conversations to be more about thoughtful caring and well-being, and then to think about, well, who might be most at risk, who do we need to support, and then get to what are the tools and the platforms we're going to use to help all kids at the end.
You're doing all of them, but prioritizing. Right. So along your journey then, let's just walk through each one of those. So in terms of the health and well-being, what has been the conversation, and what have been the way you've approached that?
I think so. We probably got started earlier than some. We decided that in spring break we were going to begin to message to lower anxiety, and so we would always think, if we have some information, yes, it's spring break, but would this actually lower people's anxiety if they knew this? And almost all the time the answer was yes. And so we found ways to sort of begin to message out. And I think early on what we did was we began to try to message out in the new ways. And so rather than sending out a letter, we started to do videos out, because just to them to get accustomed to, oh, well, this is how it works. This is what the tool's like. And just so they begin to have some familiarity. We did that with our staff over spring break, and with our parents over spring break, and our students over spring break. And so I think that was sort of those were those initial conversations. And then that whole modeling. Well, we would model that. And then what I heard happen in schools this week was then they did those same things with their school staffs, and with their school parents and their school student bodies.
So one of the things that I've been emphasizing when I'm talking to people is that you probably, in some ways, and maybe I'm not fully correct in this thinking, but you can't over communicate. To your point about, like, if you have that information, you need to be giving it to people, and it's just that maybe that constant reassuring of people if it's the right messaging. One of the challenges that I heard other people think about, I hadn't thought about, is like, and this is amplified in our time, is like, okay, so as a superintendent, you send out one message, and then the principal might be sending out a message, and then the teacher might be sending out a message, and perhaps they're slightly different, or in one case, you've got 2 children in a school, and you're getting different levels of communication from teachers. How do you kind of address that sort of continuity of that messaging?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. So I think right at the end of spring break in my message, I talked about, I was handing it off. And then I told parents and I told staff, you are going to hear a lot less from me now, and I'm handing it off to principals. You're going to hear from your principal this afternoon. And so I think we've had this, that it was important for me to set the larger context early on, and then hand it out to schools. And I've seen schools begin to hand that down to teachers, because I think in the end, what parents really want to hear is they want to hear from the people who work most closely with their kids. They are less interested in what the superintendent says, more interested in what the principal says, and really interested in what their kids' teachers are thinking.
Right.
And so I think you have to be clear about handing those pieces off. And then my job, I think now going forward, is to sort of I aggregate up what I hear is happening, and I try to continue to paint that sort of global district picture of what's happening by aggregating up the work that's happening elsewhere. All of our, like all the first responders and all that, their children are entitled to still go to school. So we're providing school for them.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So all of these ESWs are and so we have it's not many kids, but like it took a couple dozen teachers and EAs who've all stepped up and go, yeah, I'll do that. And that can make you nervous, and it's people not teaching in their, like, they could just sit at home and teach online, right? But now they're stepping up and taking the 7 a.m. shift to work with these kids.
So is that true then? Is that true all across British Columbia then, that's what every district is asked to do that?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons, like, they're really careful with the language, that schools are actually open. We're just suspending in-person instruction. And so schools are open, and all school districts are required to provide school for essential service workers' children, free, sort of 9 to 3, free of charge. And then, some of us, we're going 7 to 7. It kind of lines up with the hospital shifts and the police shifts.
What do you mean 7 to 7? Like in terms
so we offer, like, it's, how some parents would send their kids to before and after school care. So our school opens at 7 a.m. And so they can bring their kids there if they have because most of our hospitals are on a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift. And so we start at 7 a.m. and go to 7 p.m.
And that's mostly for your elementary folks?
Yeah. So it's just for 5 to 12-year-olds.
Okay. So now you want to talk about your vulnerable learners. So these are the kids that we were worried about and thinking about before all this happened, and now they're in potentially. And when we say vulnerable, obviously that doesn't necessarily include academic vulnerability. It can include all kinds of behavioral and issues. Like that's always the one that, like, I think would, if I've got a child with special needs right now, like, this has got to be extremely challenging time. So how are you dealing with those that have identified as vulnerable?
Yeah, and it is. It's a wide group that you can think of. Like, you also have to acknowledge that we have our district 600 or so international students who have now scattered all over the world. Some of them returned to their homes in China, in Italy, in Spain, in places that have been exceptionally hard hit by the virus. They want to continue with their learning. They want to continue to move on towards getting credit and graduating. And they are now 8 hours or a 10-hour time difference from here. And they have no local supports in place. And so that for us is one group. But I think you're right. I think the biggest group going forward will be some of our special needs students and how we support them. Because there are some students who will need face-to-face support. And what does that look like in the era of remote learning? I would say the last week have been about sort of putting in the larger plans and the essential service workers. I think we're in that next week or two where there'll be a fair bit of time and energy around what are we doing about sort of special needs students. And then that bigger sense of vulnerable learners, what I see happening around us in other districts is super impressive to see places like Vancouver and Surrey with their meals programs are all still carrying on. They're figuring out ways to make sure that breakfasts and lunches are being served to these families because who are reliant on that as part of their school program. And so I think, I think in West Vancouver, we have we don't have some of the same vulnerabilities as other communities, but I think a lot of thoughtfulness in BC around how do we make sure we're continuing to service those who really need school for far more things than just academics.
So, I guess that makes me think about, for better or for worse, when you look at a typical classroom and you identify, okay, so, all of these kids come with a variety of needs. And on the one hand, we're trying to be equitable, not just for the most vulnerable, but to make sure that everybody feels like they're getting this quality experience. But now, sort of given time, resources, and, priorities, we probably are going to rely on the parents who have means and the parents who have, more stability in their lives to take even more ownership of their child and their child's education, just because, we can't do what we normally did. So is that messaging sort of being given in because we wouldn't say that message in a face-to-face setting saying, well, your kids are okay, so they're not going to get any attention. We would never do that. We don't mean to do that. But I just wonder if now is the time where we have to kind of think about those parents, like, you actually don't need our help as much as like these people, and capacity wise, we gotta help these guys.
Well, and I think that gets to that priority. Like, and I think we've acknowledged that by saying, essential service workers, they're going to need help because they're working 12-hour shifts at the hospital and they're trying to stop the virus. And then special needs families, they're going to need help because they have some unique challenges. And so the everybody else bucket, you're going to have to be a little more on your own. But then also let us reassure you that, if you're a grade 12 and you're fit into that category we've just talked about, it's not that you have 95% right now in Math 12 and you're going to walk out of here with 75% in 2 months. We're not going to ding you and penalize you because you don't have access to some of the same school supports that you had, up to spring break. Like, I think we've been pretty good also with the messaging that, yes, carrying on with remote learning isn't optional, but also that nobody's trying to come out and get you.
Right. Like
we're in it to support you. Yeah, we're on your side, right? Like, that's been a mess. Like, we're on your side to make sure that, that your dreams and your goals around university that were there a month ago, we're still going to help you get to there.
Right. Are you using any specific language? I know I've been talking with a lot of people. Some people are calling it very intentionally because people are sort of already shied away from online learning. That's not really what we're talking about. It's emergency remote crisis. It's emergency real learning. It's some are using. I know in the U.S. they're using supplemental as opposed to because they're very specific about not introducing new learning. Like if you had something planned to do in May that was going to be new, that's off the table. It's all kind of under the bucket of enrichment or that kind of thing. What kind of language are you using around to frame all of it?
Yeah, I would say that we're kind of like in the middle there. We talk about remote learning. Some of it sometimes talk about sort of emergency remote learning. I would say that we would be introducing. I think there would still be new materials still being introduced. I think there is a goal that we want to make sure that some of those core pieces that you want kids to understand at a certain grade and a certain subject, that you still have a chance to cover them. I think that will become clear in the next week or two as we understand, especially in districts, the levels of access to tools and technologies. And I think we're really conscious about not widening the gap right now, that we're trying to, that in schools and districts where there's sort of an even playing field with access to tools and technology, I think there will be more, it's remote learning. I think in those places where there's a greater gap, I think we're going to see it more, as you described, around enrichment and supplemental, because I think there is everyone's bought into the idea that this shouldn't make the gap even wider between the haves and the have-nots.
So essentially, when we use the terms personal learning or personalized learning, it will probably be. I mean, I've talked about achievement gaps potentially widening just because of access, but I guess the experience that students will have will be, we just are accepting the fact it's going to be diverse because of so many factors that you can't control. And we're just going to kind of have to understand that this child's experience versus this child's experience, it has to be different.
Yeah, I think and the technology is an easy one to see, but I think you just look at where we're at in sort of crisis in communities right now, there's no way that you can have similar experiences for kids based on, depending on where their family's at with what's going on right now either.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just sort of brings the whole word of equity really has this whole another context to it that I for sure hadn't really thought about all of the nuances around it. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you talked about earlier about the emergency response things. So what other kind of stories or like just even little anecdotes around from West Vancouver teachers or leaders that you said that was really pretty awesome things you've seen already?
Yeah, so like seeing one of our teachers in the high school go in and get all their 3D printers and making help make masks for the local hospital. You know, that there's a certain ear clip, I think, or that they need to produce. And so he got all his 3D printers going, making those for the local hospital, which was cool, right? That's the whole
Right.
you know, community coming together. You know, I see photos every day of families who are posting or who are doing little chalk drawings or putting pictures up in the windows at the school. You just, it's a reminder of how important schools are, right? The centers of community are for families, and like that they're desperate for those connection pieces. You know, we this past week we had students who could come in to get stuff they needed for remote learning, and you know, could go in small groups and social distancing and all of that. And they were just so desperate to be in the building. They, you know, that they missed it so much, and you know, they didn't. You don't know what you missed it, and you're going to miss until it's gone, right? And that just that act and was an emotional experience for kids and families going in and getting things out of the school, thinking that, you know, without that sort of, there's no sort of certainty around. Well, we know we'll be back in a week or a month. It's sort of open-ended, which is a real struggle for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And it's just like, yeah, you're right. There's so many encouraging things to hear. So as you look ahead, because you don't know how long this is going to be, and you can maybe in the back of your mind think, well, this is more than likely going to be, this is the school year. What are your concerns, like that you're thinking about, like here's the thing that I'm really still concerned about, that, you know, as much as we've got things in place, I don't know how we're going to deal with this, or I'm worried about this.
Yeah, you know, one group I feel really badly for is our grade 12s. You know, there is such, I like all the pieces around graduation, and they're cultural milestones for kids. And you know, I know that they're anxious about it, they're sad about it, they're worried about it. You know, that these things are life moments around graduation, and just so, you know, if we aren't in in-person schooling in June, or those options aren't available to us, how do we celebrate the sort of an end of this piece, because they're going to move on without an ending, and I think that's really hard for kids. And so like I know that's not front of mind, and the urgent and emergency kind of work that we're doing right now, but you know, it is definitely a group that I think a lot about, in terms of how do we bring celebration and closure during this kind of time.
Well, and again, I think we, you know, as a sort of as a school district or whatever, it is sort of that like thing you just hang your hat on, that you can, you know, put on the wall and say we did it. And you know, especially those that have done 13 years of schooling, yeah, it's a big thing in a kid's life and in a school's life, to be able to honor that, and not being able to do that. You know, it's among many of the things that, of course, we're struggling with. So I just want you to know that since I've been self-isolating, I have maintained my 11,000 steps a day without even going out of the house, which is good. So I'm just wondering about you. You've got 4 kids, school-age kids. Tell me a little bit about, here's what I want to know. So I know you do go in and stuff like that, but has there just been sort of a moment in your days up to now at home that you've thought, oh, wow, I've never done this before? And it could just be just a little interaction or routine that you've established, or seen happen that you've just sort of made you be aware of, this is different.
So I'm actually going in a lot, because I found that I was struggling without the routine of work as a place. And I'm really struggling with work not being a place. And I know you've kind of lived more flexible hours and locations. I've never done that, and I can't yet. And so I go in every day to work. I'm there in the morning and I stay to the end, and I'm the only person upstairs in the office. But for me, I'm finding I haven't been able to find, when I'm at home, I'm struggling to find a routine that feels like work. And so, you know, that's a real challenge for me. Like, I have great respect for, you know, for people like you, and my wife kind of works a lot from home and can kind of turn work on and off. I can't figure out how to make home work feel like work.
Well, I don't know. You may have to. I'm not sure how this will go. But
I know, eh?
I know. But what are your steps still up high, or what are you at?
My steps are okay. They're about at the beginning of spring break, I was like, it's kind of that honeymoon. Hey, we get to be home now. I'm going to get out every day.
Right.
And now I'm kind of grinding to get my 10,000 every day. I get out
Yeah.
for a walk, and it's getting harder. And because during my day at the office, I'm sitting on Zoom calls like this all the time,
Right,
basically.
right.
Right?
Harder to
You're
be
not
on your
getting up,
little
you're not
walking.
moving around anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So my last question is, when this is all done and we look back at this, and there'll be all kinds of, examinations and thoughts around what we've gone through, what are your kind of hopes that this experience will transpire into something lasting in a positive way? Like, I don't even know if that's too early to ask, but I don't know if you've thought about that at all.
Yeah, like I think we all know it's gonna change some things permanently, but we're not quite sure what they are and how. Like, we all kind of agree. Everyone nods their head. Well, yeah, we're not going to go back to doing things the way we used to. You know, I'm pretty sure universities are going to be able to admit kids into the fall this year, like they always have. But there will have been no final exams and no final marks, but they'll figure it out. So, like, but we'd always heard that you needed to have final exams and final marks to get kids into university. So we know we'll probably find out some of those things that we said are true aren't necessarily true. And so, like, I think it's going to have a shift around the whole assessment and evaluation piece. I also think we are having, I think the current so what is it you really need to know? That's important. And then I think we talked a little bit about the sort of the centerpieces of community. I think what this also does is I think schools will be more appreciated for their value they have as sort of the gathering places in our community. One thing that we didn't talk about that I feel a little bit lost. I'm trying to post jokes and do silly blog posts, because what I worry is happening right now is that we are doing the care for people, and then we're doing here is the lesson. But then that other part of school, that banter, that fun,
Yeah.
that joy that you talk about, we're not doing that part right now. We got the other two things happening. And so, I think we've got to figure that out in this space. And then I also think that's something that we will really have missed and want to come back to when we come back face to face.
Yeah, it's that sort of, Seinfeld, it's about nothing kind of thing, but it's not really about nothing, right? Like that, like you said, like that, those interactions that seem superfluous in some ways are really about social grooming. They're about how we connect with one another. But it's like, when with the way people, and I've described a lot of this experiences, it's like a funeral, right? Everybody grieves a little differently. So we're very sensitive to the fact that, like I know with the April Fool's things, and I gave you a hard time about that. There were people who were saying, please, no April Fool's jokes. And I knew what they were doing, because of course an April Fool's jokes range from very, innocuous, very, like, your stuff is very tame kind of thing. Nobody's getting hurt by it, to,
Right.
Stuff that really is kind of like, ooh, boy, that was a little, bordering on the nasty. And so we're being extremely sensitive to that. But I think you're right. When we don't just sort of chat and say, hey, how's it going? Or, because we don't have sports to talk about, which is always a good one, right? Like, let's
Right.
talk about sports. Well, there's no sports to talk about. So we've lost a lot of the casual interactions that really make up who we are, and what we believe, and just that whole culture piece. So yeah, that's an interesting observation, is how do you maintain that, that culture, which is built around not just the big things that we're talking about now, but the little tiny moments that we just we don't know how to do, I think, and we aren't sure whether we should do them, I think. So.
Well, I was going to live tweet WrestleMania today, but I don't know if I'm going to do that or not.
Was that actually on?
They're going WrestleMania without fans.
See, that's the thing. Like, I'm trying to find out, like, because somebody shared with me. The NBA guys are doing they're doing the game thing online, so they're playing down that, which it's not my thing, but maybe, like, I'm just like. And then somebody else shared with me, like, Hot Wheels did like a Ferrari race where they did the little cars and they called it and stuff like that. And it looks pretty cool, actually, but I'm not a race guy. So, like, I'm trying to figure out what I can sort of tap into as far as this goes. But anyway, well, thanks for taking time to chat. I know, you've got a lot of stuff going on, but I appreciate, like, hearing your perspective and all things that are happening out in British Columbia.
Thanks, Dean.